Hello, my chickadees. Let's read a book. George and Matilda Mouse and the Floating School by Heather S. Buchanan. Oh, look inside the cover. Look at all of them. Wow. George and Matilda Mouse and the Floating School. There was once a doll's house tucked away in a quiet corner of an old garden. It had real glass windows and a tin door. Inside lived George and Matilda Mouse and their 5 children, Parsley, Mallow, Periwinkle, Columbine, and Polyanthus. I'm sorry. The mouse family slept all day and worked and played out all night. The little mice were sometimes very noisy, but inside the doll's house they were safe from the cat. What a cute little garden and a house. Look at all of them. Lovely. Matilda Mouse wanted her children to play with other mice, and she wanted them to learn how to read, but there was no school. Matilda decided she would start her own school, but a school needed pupils. Fergus, a very old mouse who lived nearby in a gardener's boot, had once told George and Matilda about the rock garden mice. They lived by a pond in the middle of the garden. That night, George and Matilda left the children with Fergus and set out to visit the rock garden mice. There's Fergus with the children, and George and Matilda are off to find the other mice. Behind a door in the rock garden, a ladder of twigs led down into a snug burrow. After introducing herself and George, Matilda invited the little rock garden mice to come and learn their lessons with her children in the doll's house school. The clever rock garden mice already knew the names of all the plants in the garden, but they quickly agreed to send their little mice to school. Grandmother Lobelia would bring the first pupils the very next night. The moon was shining brightly as Lobelia and the little mice set across the slippery rocks on their way to school. Suddenly, there was a big splash. Dandelion tried to leap over 2 rocks and fell, paws over tail, into the pond. Lobelia lowered Lavender on her walking stick and she grabbed Dandelion just before the goldfish got him. Ah! Back on the rock, Lobelia hugged Dandelion dry and wrapped him warmly in her shawl. It was a tired little group that finally knocked on the doll's house door. Matilda began lessons in the nursery. She used the doll's abacus to teach arithmetic, but the rock garden mice were much more interested in the doll's house toys. Matilda decided to teach cooking instead. She took the little mice down to the kitchen where George was in charge of lessons, but he couldn't find enough pots and pans for each mouse to use, so he started an art lesson. The little mice did paw painting using berry jam. When Matilda returned, she found George looking very annoyed and all the mice covered in jam. Such intricate photos, pictures, illustrations. So cool. George also taught the little mice to read using scraps of newspaper that he collected from the garbage can. Soon they knew all the words on the labels of tin cans and candy wrappers. George thought the mice should learn more about the plants, flowers, and insects outside. Helped by the older mice, he built a twig shelter next to the doll's house where the little mice could have nature study lessons. The mice did arithmetic by counting the spots on ladybugs until the bugs wandered off to find new leaves to eat. Sometimes friendly worms curved themselves into letter shapes so the mice could spell new words. And once a spider showed them how to weave a web. But when the little mice tried to copy it with thread, they got all tangled up. What did they spell up here, do you know? C-A-T. Cat. Meow. One day during a nature lesson, Bramble sang a song he made up about a bee. It was such a nice song that Matilda didn't want to stop him. But as his little voice rose higher and higher, what she had always dreaded happened. The cat found them. The mice scurried away in all directions, but poor Bramble was caught. Matilda and Fergus hid nearby, waiting for their chance to help him. George grabbed a stick. "Oh, please be careful," Matilda squeaked. George strode out in front of the cat, waving his stick and squeaking loudly. Immediately, the cat's eyes turned on him. With a growl, she sprang forward, letting go of Bramble. As George danced around in front of the cat, Matilda rushed forward and dragged Bramble away. Uh-oh. So brave, George. Big kitty, huh? Big garden cat. Just then, George tripped and dropped his stick. The cat's claw snagged his overalls and flicked him in the air. George caught a glimpse of snapping yellow teeth as he fell into a bush. The cat was still crouched, waiting for him. When George looked around, he saw a familiar sight, the garbage can. He made a dash for it, but the cat got there first. She chased poor George around and around the garbage can. Then she jumped on top of it to dive down on him. But the lid was loose, and as the cat sprang up, it tipped over and the whole can crashed down. The cat yowled and ran away. Meow! George lay frightened but safe under the garbage can lid. Slowly, a big smile spread across his face, for out of the can had tumbled something truly wonderful. I wonder what it is. What do you think it is? A cookie? George made his way cautiously back along the flower bed to the doll's house. Before he got there, he heard squeaks of joy and relief, and through the ivy rushed his family. Matilda hugged George and took him to see little Bramble, who was sipping tea in the nursery while Lobelia scurried around bandaging his scratches. Later that night, there was a knock at the door. Outside was a small group of rock garden mice. News of the disaster had reached them, and the little mice had been forbidden to return to school. Matilda wept. The school would have to close. George smiled mysteriously, handed some strong rope to the rock garden mice, and told them all to follow him. I wonder what George is up to. If he needs a rope, that's a pretty big cookie. When they got to the garbage can, George pushed aside some apple peels and stood back proudly to show Matilda what he had found. A toy Noah's Ark. "It's a new school," he announced happily. "A floating school." At dawn, the mice worked hard to drag the ark to the pond and anchor it securely. They made paddles and seats for the inside. There they are with all the paddles. There's the big boat. Wow. They painted pictures for the walls and stored food in the cupboards. There was a peg for each little mouse to hang up his life jacket and a locker for pens and paper. When the floating school was ready, the proud mice rowed it across the pond to collect the pupils for the first lessons aboard the ark. So cool. For George and Matilda, it was a dream come true. Now the mice could add pond life to their list of things to study. Fergus promised swimming lessons, but best of all, the cat never interrupted them again because, of course, cats hate getting their paws wet. The end. There's that cool inside again with all their names. George and Matilda Mouse and the Floating School by Heather S. Buchanan. Wasn't that a fun one? I love the illustrations. What skills. Beautiful artwork.